He spent 3 years hiding from the one person who could see right through him. She spent 3 years building an empire to forget the one person she never could. One blind date was all it took to blow everything wide open. If you've ever sacrificed everything for the people you love and lost yourself in the process, this story is for you. Stay until the very end, because nothing about this ending is what you expect. Hit that like button right now and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The blind date had been Derek's idea, which was reason enough for Mason Carter to almost cancel it twice. Derek Paulson was Mason's co-worker and the closest thing he had to a friend, in the way that people who eat lunch together 3 times a week and never talk about anything real sometimes become friends. Derek was 38, divorced, currently dating a woman he'd met at a hardware convention, and deeply committed to the philosophy that misery preferred company. He had spent the better part of 6 weeks wearing Mason down about this dinner, citing statistics Mason hadn't asked for about men who isolated themselves after loss, bringing it up at random moments. In the break room, in the elevator, once, inexplicably, while they were both wedged beneath a ventilation unit on the 14th floor of the Hartwell Tower, replacing a filtration seal. "There's a woman," Derek had said, grunting as he tightened a bolt. "My girlfriend knows her. She's normal. She's nice. You'd like her." "I'm fine," Mason said. He always said that. "You had cereal for dinner 4 nights this week." "Lily likes cereal. Lily is 7. You're 32. Mason had no answer for that. He tightened his own bolt and said nothing, and Derek, to his credit, let it go for another 10 days before trying again. The restaurant was called Osteria Vantana, which was the kind of name that made Mason feel underdressed the moment he typed it into his phone. It sat on the corner of Meridian and 5th, in the part of downtown Crestfield that had been aggressively renovated over the past decade. Exposed brick that looked deliberately aged. Lighting that was dim in a way that probably cost a lot of money to achieve. A wine list the size of a short novel. He'd driven past this block a dozen times, doing maintenance calls for buildings in the district, and never once thought about eating here. He sat in his truck for 4 minutes before going inside. The maitre d' took his name, confirmed a reservation under Paulson, guest of, and led him through a room full of people who all seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Mason followed, hands in the pockets of the dark blazer he'd bought 3 years ago for a job interview he didn't get, and told himself he'd stay for 90 minutes, be polite, and have a reasonable excuse ready if needed. Lily was with his neighbor, Mrs. Huang, for the evening. Mrs. Huang, 71 years old and deeply fond of Lily, who would absolutely let her stay up too late watching animated movies and eating the crackers she wasn't supposed to have before bed. Lily would be fine. Mason had 90 minutes, maybe 100. He was shown to a corner table near the window, set for 2. He sat down. He checked his phone. No messages. He looked at the menu without reading it. 12 minutes passed. He ordered water and tried to look like a man who was comfortable sitting alone in a good restaurant, which he was not. Then the front door opened. He didn't look up immediately. He was focused on a line in the menu about hand-rolled pasta, which he was reading for the 3rd time without retaining any of it. He heard the faint exchange at the entrance, the soft authority in a woman's voice giving her name, the maitre d's response. He heard heels on hardwood, approaching. He looked up when she was 3 tables away, and the world went very quiet. It wasn't recognition that hit him first. It was the specific quality of stillness that comes right before something goes wrong. The second before a system failure, the silence before an alarm. His body understood before his brain caught up, some animal part of him registering danger and pulling tight. Then his brain caught up. Ava Sterling. She hadn't seen him yet. She was glancing toward the window, and in that half-second Mason had the absurd, desperate thought that he could leave. Stand up, walk toward the back, find a hallway, a side exit, something. He had escaped harder situations than a restaurant. He had rebuilt his entire life around not being seen by certain people, and he was good at it. 3 years of being invisible, of being the guy who fixes the HVAC and goes home, of existing in the margins of a city where he used to have a name. 3 years of it, and he'd almost stopped flinching. Ava's eyes found the corner table, found him. She stopped walking. For a moment, 2 seconds, maybe 3, neither of them moved. The restaurant continued around them. A waiter crossed between them carrying two plates. Somewhere to the left, a couple laughed at something private. The world did not acknowledge that anything had shifted, but something had shifted. Ava Sterling stood very still, and the expression on her face was not the polished blankness she wore in photographs. He'd seen enough of those in the past 3 years. Her name unavoidable in the business press, on the digital displays in Hartwell Tower's lobby, on the investor documents that occasionally crossed his line of sight during a maintenance call. The expression she wore right now was something else, something unguarded, just for a moment, before the composure came back. She walked to the table. She pulled out the chair across from him. She sat down. "Mason," she said. "Ava." The waiter appeared instantly, as if summoned by the social pressure of the moment. "Can I start you both with some sparkling water, or—" "Still water is fine," Ava said, without looking at him. Her eyes didn't move from Mason's face. "Of course." The waiter disappeared. The silence between them was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of two people who once knew each other well enough to argue, well enough to trust, well enough to carry things they'd never said out loud, and who had not spoken in 3 years and 4 months, and Mason did the math without meaning to, approximately 18 days. "You're Derek's coworker," Ava said finally. "You're the woman his girlfriend knows. Her name is Priya. She's my marketing director." Something in Mason's chest moved, not pleasantly. "Of course she is." Ava studied him with the same directness she'd always had. It used to feel like being read, and it still did. She'd always been able to do that, sit across from someone and see the architecture of what they were holding back. He'd told her that once, years ago. She'd laughed and said he was projecting. Maybe he had been. "I didn't know," she said, "that it would be you." "I know. Do you believe me?" He looked at her. The honest answer was complicated. "Yes," he said. "I believe you." The water arrived. Menus were left. They both ignored them. Ava Sterling at 30 was almost identical to Ava Sterling at 27, which Mason found unfair in a way he couldn't fully articulate. She was still sharp-featured and composed, the kind of beautiful that wasn't soft or approachable, but was harder to look away from for exactly that reason. She'd cut her hair since he last saw her. Dark brown, chin-length now, instead of the longer style she'd worn before. She was dressed with the quiet precision of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. Understated, expensive, exactly right for the room. He was wearing a blazer from a job interview 3 years ago. "How long have you worked at Hartwell?" she asked. 2 years and a couple of months. "Maintenance." "Facilities, technically. I'm a senior technician now." He watched her face, looking for the reaction he'd half expected, the involuntary flicker of discomfort or pity that people sometimes showed when they found out what he did now compared to what he used to do. He'd stopped caring about that reaction a long time ago, or he told himself he had. But with Ava, he found he was still watching for it. She didn't give it to him. Her expression stayed level. "Senior technician," she said. "How long did that take?" "About a year." "You were always fast at picking things up." It was a neutral statement. It might have been a compliment. Mason wasn't sure what to do with it, so he picked up the menu and actually read it this time. "Are you hungry?" Ava asked. "I drove 40 minutes to get here. I might as well eat." Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. "Fair point, boss," they ordered. Ava chose the seafood pasta without looking at the price. Mason chose the chicken, which was the least expensive entree, out of habit. He caught himself doing it and felt briefly irritated at himself. 3 years of recalibrating every decision around cost, and it had become reflex, even when it didn't matter. The early part of the meal was careful. They talked about things that didn't require them to acknowledge the weight of what sat between them. The neighborhood, the restaurant's recent renovation, a building downtown that had been under construction for so long it had become a local joke. Ava asked about the maintenance work in general terms, and Mason answered in general terms. And it was fine. It was perfectly civil. It was exactly the kind of dinner he'd come prepared to have. Then she asked, "How's your daughter?" He hadn't expected that. Not because it was a strange question, but because the way she asked it, quietly, without preamble, as if she'd been holding it for a while, suggested she'd actually been thinking about Lily. Not just as a polite addendum. She's 7 now, he said. I know. Ava paused, adjusted. I know. He looked at her. You've been keeping track. Not in a way that's... She stopped again, and the practiced composure slipped just a little, which was unusual enough to hold his attention. I followed what I could. After everything, I was worried. She's good, Mason said. The words came out rougher than he meant them to. She's really good. She loves school. She has opinions about everything. Her teacher, the order things should be done, which of her socks are acceptable. She's 7 going on 40. She sounds like you. She sounds like her mother. The table went quiet. Rachel's name didn't have to be said. It moved into the space between them without being spoken, the way it always did in these conversations. Mason had learned to navigate around it, the way you navigate around a piece of furniture in a dark room you know well. You don't look directly at it. You just know where it is and move carefully. I'm sorry, Ava said. I should have reached out after she passed. I wanted to, and She looked down at her water glass. I didn't know what I'd be welcome to say. There wasn't much anyone could say. No, I imagine not. She looked back up. You were with her all the way through. That was never a question. He hadn't meant it as a rebuke, but Ava absorbed it as one anyway. He watched her take it, process it, set it aside. That was something else he'd always noticed about her. She didn't deflect. She took things in and sat with them, even when they were uncomfortable. I know it wasn't, she said quietly. That's what I mean. I'm not surprised you were there. She seemed to be looking for the right word. I thought about the version of your life that existed before everything went wrong. I thought about it more than you'd probably want to know. Mason put his fork down. What does that mean? He asked. It means I felt guilty, Ava said. Still do, sometimes. Not for anything I did directly, but I was there, in that environment, and I watched what they did to you, and You didn't know the extent of it? Not at the time, no. But I figured it out later. I'm not stupid, Mason. I know you're not. So I figured it out. About 6 months after you left Dryden Corp. I put it together. She was looking at him steadily now, her voice quiet and precise the way it got when she was saying something she'd thought about many times. And I've had to live with the fact that I figured it out too late to do anything about it. The word, Dryden Corp, went through him like cold water. He hadn't heard it spoken out loud in months. He kept it out of his regular vocabulary, the same way he kept certain memories out of his regular thoughts, through consistent, deliberate maintenance. You didn't dwell. You kept moving. You built a different life, and you held on to it. That wasn't your job to fix, he said. Maybe not, but I had access to information that could have helped you, and I didn't use it. I was 27 and scared of the people above me and worried about my own position, and I let it go. She paused. That's not something I'm proud of. He looked at her for a long moment. This wasn't how he'd expected this dinner to go. He'd come prepared for polite awkwardness, maybe a little surface-level reconnection, the mild discomfort of running into someone from a previous chapter of your life. He had not prepared for this. For Ava Sterling sitting across from him in this well-lit restaurant and telling him she'd carried guilt for 3 years. It's in the past, he said. He meant it to close the subject. Is it? She asked. Not unkindly, just honestly. He picked his fork back up. We should eat. The food's getting cold. A beat. Then Ava looked down at her own plate. You're right, she said. It is. They ate. The food was good. Better than Mason had expected, though he'd set his expectations low on principle. The pasta Ava had ordered turned out to be something she'd clearly ordered before. She ate it without studying it, with the specific ease of someone returning to a known quantity. Mason noticed things like that about people, the small habitual signals that told you something true about them. Ava was comfortable here. This was her city, her world. In a way it had never been his. And yet she hadn't looked at him with distance. That was the thing he was still processing, between bites and small talk and the sounds of the restaurant around them. He'd expected distance. He'd been ready for it, had actually thought it might make things easier. A clean, cool interaction with someone from another social tier who he happened to have history with. the carefully maintained separation that wealth and professional position naturally produced. Instead, she'd said, "I felt guilty." He turned that over while they moved on to safer territory, her company's recent expansion into the Pacific Northwest. He'd read about it in a headline, asked a neutral question, and she answered with the kind of directness she brought to everything, talking about the challenges without performing false modesty or inflating the achievements. He found himself listening more attentively than he'd planned to. Ava Sterling had built something real. He knew that in the abstract, from things he'd read and overheard in the building, from the way the staff at Hartwell spoke about her when she was in the building, not sycophantically, but with the genuine respect that people reserved for bosses who actually understood the work. She'd taken the small cybersecurity consulting firm she'd started at 26 and turned it into a mid-sized tech corporation with offices in 4 cities. That was not luck. That was not inheritance. That was the same quality he'd always known she had. Relentless, methodical, unflinching when a hard decision needed to be made. She hadn't gotten there by being soft, which made the guilt more interesting, not less. "Can I ask you something?" he said, when the entrees had been taken away and they were waiting for the check neither of them had asked for yet. "Yes." "Why are you still at Hartwell Tower, your company? Your offices are there, I mean. You could have moved to better space years ago. The northwest wing your floor is in has infrastructure problems. We're in there twice a month." He paused. "That's not nothing, for a company your size." Ava looked at him with an expression he couldn't read for a moment. "You've been in my offices." "I've been in the mechanical systems adjacent to your offices. Different thing. But you knew the company was mine. The name's on the lobby directory, Sterling Vantage Technologies." He met her eyes. "I've worked in that building for 2 years." Something shifted in her face. Not discomfort exactly, but the particular quality of a person recalibrating a situation they thought they understood. "You never said anything," she said slowly. "Why would I? You didn't know I was there. But you knew I was the owner." "Yes. And you just—" She stopped. "Kept showing up." "It's my job," Mason said. It came out flat, not defensive, just true. "It's a good job. I'm good at it. I wasn't going to leave because of who owned the building." Ava was quiet for a moment. Her water glass turned slowly between her fingers. An unconscious movement, something to do with her hands. He remembered that about her. She was always almost perfectly still, except for small things. Her hands. "To answer your question," she said, "I stayed at Hartwell because I know the building. I know the layout, the staff, the history of the space. Moving is disruptive, and disruption has a cost." A beat. "That's the practical answer. Is there another one?" She looked at him directly. "I grew up in this part of Crestfield, before any of this. My mother worked in a building 2 blocks from Hartwell when I was a kid. I'd wait for her after school in the lobby of a place very similar to it. I didn't want to move to some glass tower on the east side just because I could afford to." She paused. "Does that make sense?" "Yes," Mason said. It made more sense than she probably realized, because he understood staying somewhere for a reason that wasn't efficient and wasn't strategic, that was just about what you could live with. He understood that quite well. He walked her out. It wasn't planned. They'd paid, separately, after a brief and slightly awkward negotiation where Ava had moved toward the check and Mason had said, "I've got mine," with enough quiet certainty that she'd let it go. And they'd gathered their coats and moved toward the exit together because there was no other direction to move in. The evening had that quality that some evenings had, where the geography of the situation didn't leave much room for careful exits. Outside, the night air had the particular chill of early autumn in Crestfield, the kind that hadn't committed to cold yet, but was starting to practice. The street was still active, restaurants, a bar 2 doors down with its door propped open, a couple walking a dog that wanted to investigate every crack in the pavement. They stood on the sidewalk. "I'm parked on Caldwell," Mason said. "The garage." "My car is coming." She had her phone in her hand, a car service app visible on the screen. "Of course." At a silence. A cab moved past. The bar's door swung open and closed, releasing a brief burst of noise. "This wasn't what I expected," Ava said. "No." Is that a good thing or a bad thing? He considered the question. He thought about Lily at Mrs. Huang's, probably well past her bedtime now, probably face down in crackers and a movie about a talking animal. He thought about the drive home, the familiar route, the way his apartment looked when he let himself in after a long evening, small and worn and exactly specific to his life, in a way that had stopped feeling like failure somewhere around the 18-month mark and had started feeling like something else, like a version of a life he'd made deliberately. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. Ava nodded slowly. "Fair answer." The car pulled up. Dark, quiet, the kind of service vehicle that didn't draw attention. She moved toward it, then stopped, turned back. "Mason?" she said. "For what it's worth." She paused, and he could see her choosing the words with care, the way she always had. "I don't think less of you. For what you chose, I want you to know that." He looked at her. "I know most people did," she said. "I know that's what you think. That the people who knew what you used to be looked at what you became and filed you somewhere smaller." She held his gaze. "I didn't. I don't." He didn't know what to say to that. There were several possible responses, and he went through them in the space of a second and discarded them all because none of them were quite honest enough or quite right. "Thank you," he said finally, because it was true, and because some things didn't need a longer answer. Ava nodded once. She got in the car. He stood on the sidewalk and watched it pull away, and then he turned and walked toward the parking garage on Caldwell, hands in his pockets, the autumn chill settling properly around him now that he wasn't concentrating on anything else. He drove home thinking about almost nothing. He let himself into the apartment at 10:47 p.m. Mrs. Huang was asleep in the armchair, as expected. Lily was asleep on the couch in a tangle of blanket, with a half-eaten sleeve of crackers on the cushion beside her, exactly as predicted. The TV was on, playing something softly. Mason picked Lily up carefully, the practiced lift of a person who had done this exact thing hundreds of times. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, which somehow never stopped surprising him. She shifted and made a small sound but didn't wake, just pressed her face against his shoulder with the automatic trust of a sleeping child. He carried her to her room. He pulled her covers over her. He stood in the doorway for a moment in the dark and listened to her breathe. Then he went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and thought about Ava Sterling, saying, "I don't think less of you." He'd spent 3 years, 4 years really, counting the last difficult year of Rachel's illness, building a life that did not depend on anyone else's assessment of him, a life that was small and functional and his. He'd stopped measuring himself against what he used to be, against the career that had ended, against the version of Mason Carter who had once been good enough at something to matter in a way the world acknowledged. He'd stopped, and he'd built something different, and he mostly didn't look back. But there was something about hearing those words from Ava specifically, from someone who had been in that world, who had known him when he had the kind of success that came with a title and a salary grade and a future people could see from the outside, that moved through him in a way he hadn't prepared for. It didn't make him feel rescued. It didn't make him feel validated, exactly, in the way he'd once craved validation from people who no longer had the power to offer it. It just made him feel seen. Correctly, for once. Without the distortion of pity or the awkwardness of an old story being brought up in bad light. He stood at the kitchen counter for a few minutes longer. Then he went to bed. He didn't sleep right away. He lay in the dark and thought about the dinner, about the specific quality of Ava Sterling's directness, about what it meant that she had stayed in a building with infrastructure problems for reasons that had nothing to do with efficiency, about the way her hands turned the water glass, about the fact that in 3 years of working in the same building, he had carefully, consistently made sure their paths never crossed. He thought about that for a while. Outside the window, the city made its quiet nighttime sounds. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and stopped. The heater in the corner of the room made its small, reliable sound. Mason closed his eyes. The next morning, Lily woke him up at 6:43 by sitting on his legs. "There are no clean bowls," she said, with the specific gravity she reserved for genuine household crises. "There are clean bowls, second shelf, back left." "Those are the weird ones." "They're the same size as the other ones. They have a different shape." He opened one eye. Lily was sitting upright on his shins, her hair still half tangled from sleep, wearing the shirt she'd gone to bed in and mismatched socks. She looked at him with the patient expectation of someone who was prepared to wait. "Fine," he said. "I'll get up. I also want the kind with the fruit pieces." "We don't have the kind with the fruit pieces." "We should." "I'll add it to the list." He untangled himself and went to the kitchen and found that the bowl situation was, in fact, resolvable with about 40 seconds of effort. He got her settled with cereal in the correct bowl. The shape of the other bowls really was slightly different. He'd never quite noticed it before, and made himself coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching the morning come in over the rooftops. Lily ate with the focused efficiency she brought to most tasks. She'd started second grade 6 weeks ago and had opinions about her teacher that shifted weekly, a complicated relationship with a girl in her class named Sophie that seemed to involve equal parts friendship and rivalry, and a current passionate interest in the habits of migratory birds that Mason suspected would give way to something else within a month. "Mrs. Huang let me stay up till 10, Lily said, without looking up from her bowl. "I know." "She said you were at dinner." "I was." "With a girl?" He looked at her. She was still eating, the picture of innocence. "Where did you hear that?" "Mrs. Huang said Derek from your work made you go on a date." Lily finally looked up. Her expression was the one she got when she was trying to seem neutral about something she had actual feelings about. She was not as good at this as she thought she was. "Was she nice?" Mason turned back to the window. The morning light was coming in at a low angle, catching the dust on the glass. "She was someone I used to know, Isha," he said. "That's not what I asked." He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, asking him questions with the precision of someone 20 years older. He thought about Rachel, about how she'd looked at him sometimes in the same direct way, like she could see the answer before he'd given it and was just waiting for him to catch up. "Yeah," he said. "She was nice." Lily processed this for a moment. Then she went back to her cereal. "Okay," she said. He drank his coffee. The morning continued. He had a shift at 8, a long list of deferred work orders, and a building he'd worked in for 2 years where, as of last night, at least one thing had fundamentally changed. He finished his coffee. He got Lily's lunch together. He got dressed, got her ready, drove her to school, watched her run inside without looking back. The particular confidence of a child who trusted the world to hold her, which was, he thought, one of the more valuable things a parent could give a kid. The ability to walk away without checking. He'd worked hard to give her that. He pulled out of the school lot and headed downtown toward the building, toward work. The work order for the 14th floor came in 3 days after the dinner. Mason saw it on his tablet at 7:52 a.m., standing in the facilities office with a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm while he was signing off on a separate job in the parking structure. Routine inspection, northwest wing, floors 12 through 16. The kind of thing he did twice a month. The kind of thing he had done without incident for 2 years, because Ava Sterling kept normal business hours and he kept maintenance hours, and the building was large enough that the distance between them had never been a problem. He stared at the work order for a moment longer than necessary. Then he picked up his kit and went to work. The 12th and 13th floors were straightforward. A loose panel in the climate control on 12, a filtration check on 13 that came back clean. He worked steadily and without hurry, the way he always did, moving through the mechanical systems with the practiced ease of someone who had stopped needing to think consciously about most of it. His hands knew the work. That was one of the things he'd actually come to appreciate about the job. The way competence eventually became physical, the way his body could be doing one thing while his mind was somewhere quieter. His mind was not particularly quiet on the 14th floor. He came out of the mechanical corridor into the main hallway and found himself 30 feet from the glass-walled reception area of Sterling Vantage Technologies. The logo was clean and minimal, SVT in dark gray against white, the kind of branding that didn't shout. Through the glass, he could see a reception desk, a waiting area with low chairs, someone moving between offices in the background. He turned left toward the utility access panel and got to work. He was 20 minutes into the inspection when he heard her voice, not directed at him. She was talking to someone in the corridor behind him, moving between the SVT suite and what he knew was the small conference room 3 doors down. Her voice had a specific quality when she was working, clipped, precise, the warmth that had been present over dinner largely absent, replaced by the particular efficiency of someone who had made a decision and was communicating it clearly. Tell Renner we're not moving the timeline. If his team needs 2 more weeks, they should have flagged it before the review cycle, not after. I'm not restructuring the launch because someone didn't manage their own calendar. A pause. The other voice, quieter, male, said something Mason couldn't make out. That's not my concern, Ava said. I'll talk to him directly if it comes to that. Set it up for Thursday. Footsteps moving away. Mason kept his eyes on the panel and his hands on the diagnostic tool. Mason. He turned. Ava was standing 10 feet away, a tablet under her arm, wearing a dark blazer over a light shirt, her hair pulled back. She looked like the person she was in this building, in charge, composed, entirely at home in this environment. She also looked slightly surprised to see him, which told him she hadn't known he'd be here. Morning, he said. You're on this floor today. Routine inspection, northwest wing. She nodded slowly. There was a beat of something. Not quite awkwardness, but the particular adjustment of 2 people recalibrating how to interact in a context that had just shifted on them. How long will you need? She asked. Another 40 minutes, give or take. Fine. She glanced at the panel, then back at him. The climate control on this end has been inconsistent. Cold in the morning, too warm by 2 in the afternoon. I'll check the zone calibration, he said. Probably a damper issue. Thank you. She paused for a fraction of a second, and in that fraction he could see her deciding something. Do you have lunch plans? He looked at her. That came out more abrupt than I meant it to, she said, with the slight impatience she directed at herself when she said something incorrectly. I meant, there's a decent place on the ground floor of the building next door, if you're taking a break at noon. No agenda. I take lunch at 12:15, he said. I'll meet you in the lobby. She was already walking back toward the SVT suite. Mason turned back to the panel. The damper, as he'd suspected, needed recalibrating. He fixed it in 11 minutes. The rest of the inspection took 30. He filed the report on his tablet and moved to the next floor, and he did not think, in any sustained way, about what had just happened. He was good at compartmentalization. He had needed to be for a long time, and the skill had stuck. At 12:15 exactly, he came through the lobby, and Ava was there. The place next door was a narrow sandwich shop with 8 tables and a counter that always had a line. Not the kind of place you'd expect the owner of a mid-sized tech corporation to eat lunch, which was probably why she liked it. She ordered, without looking at the menu, a turkey and avocado on wheat, and paid before he could do anything about it. That's not necessary, he said. You fixed my climate control problem. Consider it professional courtesy. They found a table near the window. Outside, the Crestfield midday foot traffic moved past in the particular purposeful rhythm of a city block in the middle of a workday. Mason unwrapped his sandwich and tried to figure out what register this lunch was supposed to exist in. You don't have to make this complicated, Ava said, watching him. I'm not making it complicated. You have the look of someone doing a lot of internal negotiation. That's just my face. She almost smiled. It really isn't. He took a bite of his sandwich. She took a bite of hers. The shop's ambient noise, the counter staff, the coffee machine, the 2 guys at the next table having an argument about a project, filled in the space. Tell me about Dryden Corp., Ava said. The sandwich stopped halfway down. He set it on the wrapper. Why? Because I've been thinking about what I told you the other night, about figuring it out too late. She met his eyes steadily. I want to know what actually happened, not the version that was put on record, what actually happened. That's not a lunch conversation. Then tell me how much time you need and we'll schedule it properly. Ava, I'm not asking out of curiosity, she said. I'm asking because I think it matters. And I think you haven't told the full version to very many people, and I think you should. She paused. But I also won't push if you're not ready. He looked at her. She looked back, and there was nothing aggressive in it, nothing that demanded anything from him. Just the same directness she'd always had, which had always been both the most useful and most uncomfortable thing about her. The table next to them erupted briefly over whatever the project disagreement was. Mason picked up his sandwich again. I was 28, he said. It was 4 years ago. I'd been at Dryden Corp for 3 years. Senior cybersecurity engineer, good salary, on track for a principal role in another year or two. Rachel and I had just found out she was pregnant. Everything was... He stopped. Everything was going the way you expect things to go when you're 28 and things are working. He paused. Ava said nothing, just waited. There was an attempted breach, he said. External threat actor, sophisticated, targeted. They were going after proprietary data, our client infrastructure models, potentially catastrophic exposure if it went through. I caught it early because I'd been monitoring a specific vulnerability in our third-party integration layer that my supervisor kept telling me wasn't a priority. I'd been tracking it on my own time for 6 weeks. Because you knew it was a risk. Because I knew it was a risk and nobody else seemed to want to know that. He set the sandwich down again. I flagged it 12 times across 8 months. I have the documentation. I had it then. When the breach attempt happened, I was able to block it because I'd already built the countermeasure. The exposure was prevented. Complete. The system held. I remember there being an incident at Dryden around that time, Ava said slowly. I was at a different firm then, but it came up in industry conversation. I remember the characterization being that there had been a failure that was caught before major damage. The characterization was managed, Mason said. The phrase was flat and precise, the way he'd learned to say things about that period without the heat he'd once felt, because the heat had cooled into something harder and less combustible. Garrett Nichols, my direct supervisor, and 2 of the senior VPs had been operating a secondary consulting arrangement on the side. Private clients. They were using Dryden's architecture data to inform their work. Nothing illegal on the surface, but deep gray area, and if any of the breach traffic had been analyzed properly, it would have shown their access patterns in the data we were protecting. So when you stopped the breach, I stopped the breach and submitted a full incident report, which is protocol. The report showed exactly where the threat had entered, what it had been targeting, and what countermeasures had contained it. He paused. Nichols saw the report before it went to the board. The sections that were inconvenient for him got revised. Revised how? The breach went from prevented by a targeted countermeasure developed by Mason Carter over 6 months of proactive monitoring to caught incidentally during a routine system scan. And the explanation for the delayed early detection, why the vulnerability existed in the first place, was attributed to inadequate monitoring by the junior security team. He met her eyes. I was the junior security team, effectively? Ava had stopped eating. Her hands were still on the table, and the expression on her face was not pity. It was the controlled, contained anger of someone who had worked in that kind of environment long enough to know exactly how the mechanics of it functioned. They blamed you for the vulnerability they created conditions for. They blamed me for creating a vulnerability I'd been trying to get them to address for 8 months. Yes. He picked up his coffee cup. Then they initiated a performance review based on the revised incident record. The review found that I had failed to properly monitor a known integration risk. I was put on a corrective action plan, which is designed to make leaving look like your choice. Which made leaving look like my choice, yes. I resigned before the formal termination. Same outcome, less drama. And you didn't fight it. He looked at her. I know you didn't fight it, she said. I know that's not what happened. I'm asking you why. The sandwich shop moved around them, indifferent. The 2 guys at the next table had apparently resolved their disagreement and were now discussing something about a football game. The coffee machine made its noise. Rachel's diagnosis came 3 weeks after I resigned, Mason said. Stage 3, aggressive. He put the coffee cup down with more care than was necessary. The treatment options required a very specific oncologist, Dr. Patricia Wend, out of Crestfield Memorial. She had a 3-month waiting list unless you were in the system already, unless someone who knew her could get you in faster. My former colleague James, we'd worked together at Dryden, his wife had been treated by Wen 2 years earlier. James still had the relationship. He could feel Ava watching him, but he kept his eyes on the table. James called in the favor, Mason said. Rachel got the appointment, but James was still at Dryden. He was low enough in the structure that Nichols hadn't bothered to touch him, but he was close enough to the situation that if I'd gone public with what I had, If I'd filed a complaint, if I'd taken it to the board or to industry regulators, James would have been implicated by proximity, not for anything he did, just because he was there. And you didn't want that to happen to him when you needed his help. I needed his help first. I needed Rachel to get to Wend. That was the only thing that mattered. He finally looked up, and after that, when the treatment started and she needed me present consistently every day, I didn't have the bandwidth. You can't fight a professional battle and hold someone through chemotherapy at the same time. You can't do both. I tried to think about whether there was a way, and there wasn't. Not for me. Not with a newborn and a wife who was scared and needed someone steady. The word steady came out with a weight that he hadn't intended to put there. He heard it and kept going. So I let it go, he said. I took the first job that would have me. Maintenance, because the licensing crossed over with some of my technical background, and because it was stable work with predictable hours. I kept the rest of it filed away somewhere. Not forgotten, just set down. Ava was very quiet. You traded your career to keep your family intact, she said. I traded my career to get Rachel the doctor she needed and to be present for the time we had left. His voice didn't waver, but his jaw tightened. I'd make the same choice again. There's nothing complicated about it. I know, Ava said. I know there isn't. That's not what I meant. She paused, and he could see her choosing her next words with the care she brought to things that mattered. I meant that you did something quietly that most people would have needed an audience for. You didn't announce it. You didn't turn it into a story. You just did it. It wasn't a story. It was just Tuesday. Mason. Her voice was level. You can accept a straightforward statement without deflecting. He looked at her across the sandwich table with its paper wrappers and paper cups, in the narrow shop with its 8 tables and its lunch crowd. This woman who ran a corporation from the 14th floor and could have been eating somewhere considerably better, who had ordered her own lunch before he could, and had asked him about the worst chapter of his life without flinching or making it small. Fine, he said. Thank you. That's all I was looking for. He ate the rest of his sandwich. She ate the rest of hers. The afternoon outside the window moved at its own pace. There's something you should know, Ava said when they were nearly done. Something in her tone made him look up. About 3 months ago, she said carefully, I started an internal audit of some historical vendor and contractor records. It's standard practice when a company changes certain operational structures. Some of those records, old ones from a period about 4 years ago, included references to Dryden Corp. They were connected to a partnership we'd had with them through a third party. She paused. I haven't finished going through everything yet, but what I've found so far is interesting. He was very still. Interesting how? He said. Interesting in the way that financial records from consulting arrangements that were supposed to be disclosed and weren't tend to be interesting. She held his gaze. I'm not done looking, but Mason, the documentation doesn't match the official incident record from the breach. Something moved in his chest. He sat with it for a second, not sure what to do with it, what it meant practically, whether he was allowed to feel anything about it. I'm not telling you this to give you hope about something that might not go anywhere, Ava said. I'm telling you because you told me the truth, and I think you deserve to know what I'm looking at. What would you do with it? He asked, if you found what you're looking for. I don't know yet. That depends on what I find. A pause. But I'm the owner of my company. I have resources and I have access. And if the record that destroyed your career was manufactured, then there's a possibility, not a certainty, but a possibility, that it can be corrected. Ava. He said her name the way he had at the restaurant. Just the name. A small flat sound that contained something too large for the current setting. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. She was already folding up the wrapper from her sandwich, moving with the efficiency of someone who had a full afternoon ahead of her. I want to. She looked at him once more, direct and without decoration. Finish your lunch. I have a 2 o'clock. She stood, picked up her cup, and was gone. Mason sat at the table by the window and looked at the last corner of his sandwich and thought about the specific sensation of having a thing you had carefully buried suddenly develop the possibility of becoming unburied. It was not entirely comfortable. It was not what he had expected when Derek Paulson had told him there was a woman, she was normal, he'd like her. He ate the last corner of his sandwich. He went back to work. That Thursday, he picked Lily up from school at 3, and she had opinions about the homework situation. Too much. Specifically the reading log. Specifically the requirement to write 3 sentences about what she had read and whether she had liked it. 3 sentences, she said, in the back seat, with the precision of someone reciting an injustice. Every night. That doesn't seem like a lot. It is a lot when you already know if you liked it. What did you read last night? The one about the turtle. Did you like it? The turtle was fine. I didn't like the part where his friends were mean. Write that. 3 sentences. A pause. That's 3 sentences? The turtle was fine. I did not like the part where his friends were mean. I think they should have been nicer. That's 3 sentences. From the back seat, silence that had the texture of a child realizing a problem was actually simpler than they'd made it. Oh, Lily said. Yeah. He drove. The afternoon traffic moved them slowly through the residential blocks toward home, past the school, past the park, past the Vietnamese bakery on Clement Street that Lily had been campaigning to stop at for 3 weeks, and that Mason had not yet found a way to reasonably refuse, so they stopped. Inside, Lily studied the display with the seriousness it deserved. Mason looked at his phone. There was an email from an address he didn't recognize. A Sterling Vantage domain, but not Ava's direct address, a general intake address. The subject line was Documentation Request, Historical Records Review. He read it standing in the bakery while Lily decided between 2 things that were clearly the same thing in different shapes. The email was formal, not from Ava, but from someone on her compliance team, requesting that he provide whatever documentation he had retained from his time at Dryden Corp related to the incident in question for the purposes of their internal review. His participation was voluntary. All provided materials would be held in confidence. A contact name was listed along with a direct number. At the bottom, in a separate paragraph, a note. Miss Sterling wanted me to let you know she's personally reviewing this matter. He put his phone in his pocket. The round one, Lily said authoritatively, pointing. Good choice, said the woman behind the counter. Mason paid. They went home. He made dinner, actual dinner, pasta with the jarred sauce Lily preferred over the scratch version, because some battles weren't worth winning, and sat with her while she did her homework, including the 3 sentences about the turtle, which took her 4 minutes once she stopped negotiating with the assignment and just wrote it. After Lily was in bed, Mason sat at the kitchen table with the box he kept in the back of the hall closet. It was a medium-sized cardboard box, the kind that reams of printer paper came in. On the outside, in his handwriting from 4 years ago, were the words, Dryden, keep. Inside were printouts, USB drives, email chains printed as PDFs, a spiral notebook with handwritten timestamps and notes, screenshots of system logs, a copy of the original incident report before it had been revised, obtained through a colleague's personal email account 2 days before Mason had resigned, at a point when he'd still thought he might fight it. He hadn't opened the box in 14 months. He opened it now. He sat at the kitchen table and went through it systematically, the way he used to go through system architecture before a major build, methodically, without skipping anything, without letting his feelings about what he was reading interfere with the reading itself. He labeled what he had and what it documented. He noted what was missing, what would need to be requested through formal channels, what could be corroborated. It took 2 hours. When he was done, he had a clear picture of what he was holding and what it was worth. He sat with it for a long time. In the quiet of the apartment, with the familiar night sounds outside and Lily asleep down the hall, he thought about what it meant to set something down. He'd told himself for 3 years that he'd made peace with the way things had ended at Dryden, and the strange truth was that he mostly had. The peace wasn't performed. He genuinely had stopped waking up angry about it, had genuinely rebuilt himself around the life he'd made instead. He didn't need the record corrected to be okay, but he sat there at the table with the box open in front of him and acknowledged quietly and without drama that okay and whole were not the same thing. They had never quite been the same thing. He put the documents back in order and closed the box and made himself a cup of coffee he didn't particularly need. He stood at the window and drank it while the city moved through its midnight business. Then he went to his desk, found a clean envelope, wrote the compliance contact's name on the front, and put one of the USB drives inside, the one with the system logs. He'd send it tomorrow. He'd see what happened. That was as much as he could control. The USB drive sat on the compliance officer's desk for 11 days before Mason heard anything. He knew this because he was counting, in the background, the way you count things you're trying not to count. Not obsessively, but with the persistent low-level awareness of someone waiting for a result they've told themselves not to expect. He went to work. He fixed things. He picked Lily up from school and listened to the ongoing Turtle Book saga, which had given way to a chapter book about a girl who discovered she could communicate with weather, which Lily found mostly credible. He made dinner. He helped with homework. He had a normal 2 weeks, largely, except for the envelope he'd mailed on a Thursday morning and the specific quality of silence that followed it. On day 11, Ava called him. Not a text. An actual call, which meant something. He was in the parking structure doing a relay check on the ventilation system when his phone buzzed in his chest pocket. He saw her name on the screen and felt something shift in his chest, a specific adjustment of pressure, before he answered. "I can talk for about 10 minutes, he said by way of greeting. "This won't take 10 minutes. Her voice was the working version, direct, no ambient warmth, but not cold either, focused. "The logs you sent. Our forensics contractor finished going through them last night." He stopped moving. "And," he said, "the timestamps are clean. They've been verified against 3 independent system records that Dryden Corp filed with their insurance carrier in the weeks following the incident. Records they couldn't have anticipated needing to fabricate because they didn't know those filings would ever be compared to the internal logs." A brief pause. The gap between what the logs show and what the official incident record claims is not a discrepancy. It's a contradiction. The ventilation unit hummed steadily around him. Somewhere in the parking structure, a car started, moved, found a space. "How clear is it?" Mason asked. "Clear enough that my legal team used the word actionable twice in the same sentence this morning." Another pause, shorter. "Mason, you stopped that breach 16 hours before the official record says the threat was even detected. The countermeasure you built is documented in the system architecture logs. Your name is on every timestamp. Nichols's revised report didn't just minimize your contribution, it inverted the sequence of events." He sat down on a concrete parking bumper. "I know," he said. His voice came out quieter than he'd intended. "Did you know how complete it was when you walked away? I knew what I had. I knew it was enough if someone wanted to look." He paused. "Nobody wanted to look." "I want to look," Ava said. She said it simply, without drama, which was somehow the version of it that landed hardest. "My compliance team is already preparing a formal review request to the industry certification body. We have enough to compel Dryden's current management to respond. They've changed leadership twice since Nichols left, and the new board has no loyalty to the old cover story. Our legal team thinks they'll cooperate rather than litigate when they see what we have." Mason leaned forward, elbows on his knees, phone pressed to his ear. The concrete was cold through his work pants. The parking structure smelled like exhaust and oil and the particular mineral damp of underground spaces. He'd spent 2 years in this building. He knew this smell. "Ava," he said. "Yes." "Why are you doing this?" A pause that was different from her other pauses. Longer, less like calculation, and more like actual thought. "Because it's wrong," she said. "What they did is wrong, and it's sitting on the record wrong, and I have the ability to do something about it." Her voice was steady. "That's the whole reason." "Is it?" "It's the reason I'm giving you," she said. "Don't push on it right now. We have work to do." He almost said something else. He didn't. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "A formal statement, detailed, chronological, everything you remember about the monitoring timeline and the countermeasure development. Your legal right to provide this is clean. You were the engineer, it's your professional record, and you retained documentation you were entitled to retain." She paused. "I also want you to talk to our forensics contractor directly. His name is David Reyes. He's good. He'll need a technical walkthrough of what you built." "I can do that." "Saturday morning. His office is downtown on Hargrove. I'll send you the address." Saturday works. He stood up off the parking bumper, straightened his back. "I have Lily in the afternoon." Morning session, 9 to 12. You'll be done by noon. He almost pointed out that she'd already scheduled it before asking him. He decided it didn't bother him enough to mention. Fine, he said. Good. A brief silence. Mason? Yeah. I know this wasn't something you went looking for. She said it carefully, the way she said things she'd thought about before saying. I want you to know, regardless of what the outcome is or how far this goes, what you did 4 years ago is on the record between us. I know what happened. You know what happened. That part is already fixed. He stood in the parking structure with those words in his ear and did not say anything for a moment, because there wasn't much to say to that. It was the kind of statement that didn't need a response so much as a place to land. I'll be there Saturday, he said. I'll see you then. She hung up. He stood there for another minute, then put his phone back in his chest pocket and went back to the relay check because the work was there and it needed doing, and Mason Carter had long ago learned that the most reliable thing in any given day was the task in front of you. Saturday morning, he dropped Lily at Mrs. Huang's with a promise to be back by noon and drove to the address Ava had sent him. The building on Hargrove was a converted warehouse, the kind of space that tech-adjacent firms had been colonizing in Crestfield's South District for the past decade. Exposed ductwork, good lighting, the particular aesthetic of people who wanted their work environment to say something about them. Reyes Forensics occupied the second floor. David Reyes was about 45, compact and efficient, with the specific energy of someone who spent most of his time looking at data and preferred it to looking at people, but was professionally committed to being decent at both. He shook Mason's hand, offered coffee, and got immediately to business, which Mason appreciated. Ava was already there when Mason arrived. She was at a table with a laptop and a printed stack of documents, and she looked up when he came in with the ease of someone who had been working for a while and wasn't startled by the interruption. You found it, she said. The address you sent me was accurate. Sit down. David will start with the log analysis. For 2.5 hours, Mason walked Reyes through the architecture of what he'd built 4 years ago. The vulnerability he'd identified in the integration layer, the monitoring protocol he'd written on his own time, the countermeasure he'd deployed in the 12 minutes between detecting the breach attempt and containing it. He was more fluent in it than he expected to be. He hadn't spoken technically about his old work in years, had kept it packed away with the same careful compression he applied to most things from that period. But the knowledge was still there, intact, organized in the specific way that things you built with your hands stay organized in your memory. Reyes asked precise questions and took precise notes and occasionally pulled up sections of the log analysis on his screen to cross-reference in real time. He said good 3 times, which Mason gathered was the Reyes equivalent of significant enthusiasm. Ava sat slightly apart from them, mostly quiet, tracking the technical conversation with the attention of someone who understood enough to follow, but was smart enough to know when to stay out of the way. Occasionally she asked a clarifying question. Occasionally she made a note on her legal pad. At 11:40, Reyes leaned back in his chair. The documentation you've provided, combined with what we pulled from the insurance filings and the internal Sterling Vantage audit records, gives us a complete picture, he said. There is no version of a reasonable technical review that supports the Dryden incident record as filed. The countermeasure was designed, implemented, and executed by you, starting approximately 6 months before the breach attempt and resolving within the same work shift it began. He paused. The record that attributed the detection failure to inadequate monitoring by your team is not a matter of interpretation. It's factually inconsistent with the log data. Mason looked at him steadily. I know, he said. I know you know, Reyes said. I'm saying it out loud because it needs to be said out loud. He glanced at Ava, then back. My formal report goes to Sterling Vantage's legal team Monday morning. Depending on how the certification board moves, you could be looking at a formal record correction within 60 to 90 days. Dryden's current management will want to settle quietly. They don't need this becoming public any more than you needed it buried. 60 to 90 days. Mason did the math. It was a number he could hold. Not today, not tomorrow, but a date that existed on an actual calendar. Thank you, he said. He meant it for Reyes, but he was looking at Ava when he said it. Ichi. They walked out together onto Hargrove Street in the thin November sunlight that Crestfield did in autumn, pale and precise, the kind of light that showed everything clearly and warmed nothing particularly. "I need to get back for Lily by noon," Mason said. "I know, you have 20 minutes. Ava was walking beside him at a pace that matched his, which was something he registered without commenting on. "How do you feel?" "I'm not sure yet." He thought about it genuinely, because she was asking genuinely and she would know the difference. "Weird, I think. 2 years ago, I would have said I didn't need this. I mostly meant it. And now? Now I think there's a difference between not needing something and not wanting it." He paused. "I'd stopped wanting it. I'd made peace with not having it. But sitting in there saying it all out loud..." He stopped, started again. "It's different when someone competent is listening and taking notes. You've been listened to like you were worth listening to." "Yeah." The word came out rough at the edges. They walked past a coffee shop, a dry cleaner, a space that used to be something and was currently between things. The Crestfield South District had this quality in certain blocks. In transition, not quite there yet, full of potential and uncertainty in roughly equal measure. "Can I ask you something?" Mason said. "Yes?" "What happens to you if this gets complicated? If Dryden pushes back, if it becomes a bigger thing than a quiet settlement?" He glanced at her. "You're the one who opened this. You pulled records, you hired the contractor, you put your legal team on it. That's not nothing." "I know it's not nothing. I'm asking if you've thought about the cost." She was quiet for half a block. "I've thought about it," she said. "Dryden has legacy relationships in the industry. Some of those relationships overlap with mine. There's a version of this where some people take issue with the fact that I went looking for something I could technically have left alone." A pause. "I think that version is manageable, and I think it's a smaller problem than the alternative, which is leaving a falsified professional record standing because it was inconvenient to correct. Most people would choose the inconvenience. I'm aware of that." She glanced at him with the dry precision she brought to understatement. "I'm not most people." He stopped walking. She stopped a step ahead of him and turned. They were standing on a stretch of sidewalk that was unremarkable in every way. Cracked concrete, a bollard, the far edge of the coffee shop's outdoor sign swinging slightly in the November wind. There was nothing scenic about it, nothing that would merit this moment in any narrative sense. "Ava," he said. She looked at him and waited. "I don't know what this is," he said. "I want to be honest about that. I'm 32 years old, and I have a 7-year-old, and I've spent 3 years building a life that works. And it works partly because I stopped trying to manage things I couldn't control." He paused. "I don't know what to do with you." "That's an honest thing to say," she said. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know I'm not. Unaware of what's happening. I'm just not sure what to do about it." Ava stood on the sidewalk with her hands in her coat pockets, and the November light came down on her face, and she looked at him with the expression she had when she was thinking something through completely before she spoke. "I don't need you to know what to do about it," she said. "I'm not asking you for anything right now. I went looking at those records because it was right, not because I was trying to engineer a particular outcome with you." She paused. "If something comes of this, the record correction, you getting your professional standing back, your options opening up, that's complete in itself. That's enough. And the rest of it? The rest of it can move at whatever pace it needs to." She met his eyes. "I'm not in a hurry." He looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. It wasn't a grand statement. It wasn't a resolution. But it was honest, which had always been the currency between them. And it was enough for the sidewalk on Hargrove Street on a Saturday morning in November with 15 minutes until he needed to get back to his daughter. They walked back to their cars. 2 weeks later, the Certification Board's preliminary inquiry landed on the Dryden Court Board's desk, according to Ava's legal team. Mason knew about it because Ava's lawyer, a composed woman named Nora Tillman, who communicated in the kind of clear, structured sentences that made things feel manageable even when they weren't, sent him a summary email on a Tuesday afternoon. He read it at the kitchen table after Lily was in bed. Dryden Corp's current board had retained outside counsel within 48 hours. That was, according to Nora Tillman, a positive sign. It meant they were taking the inquiry seriously and were not prepared to simply deny. It could still go various directions, and the timeline was still 60 to 90 days, but the preliminary response was not resistance. He put the laptop to sleep and sat in the kitchen quiet. 3 days after that, Derek found him at lunch. They were in the break room on 7, a nondescript space with a microwave that ran 10 seconds slow and a coffee maker that had been there longer than either of them. And Derek sat down across from Mason with the energy of someone who had been waiting for an opening. "So," Derek said. "No," Mason said. "I haven't said anything yet." "You have the face of someone about to say something." "Priya told me that Ava Sterling had lunch with someone in the building 2 weeks ago." Derek picked up his coffee cup. "And that she cleared her calendar for a Saturday morning, which apparently she never does." A pause. "And that Priya has been instructed very specifically not to share any information about it." Mason ate his sandwich. "The instruction to not share information is itself information," Derek said helpfully. "Derek, I'm just observing." "I know what you're doing." Derek leaned back, not remotely abashed. "I set up a blind date. I'm just trying to understand what I caused." "You caused me to have dinner with someone I used to know." "Someone you used to know who owns the building we work in." "Yes." "And now you're having lunch with her." "We had lunch once." "And the Saturday thing?" Mason looked at him. "That was a professional meeting." "Priya said Ava came home afterward and made pasta." "What does pasta have to do with anything?" "She only cooks when she's processing something," Derek said, with the confident authority of a man who had been dating someone for 4 months and believed himself to have full insight into her behavioral patterns. "Priya said she made the whole thing from scratch." Mason was quiet for a moment. "She's a grown woman," he said, "with a very complicated set of professional obligations and more actual responsibilities than either of us will ever have. Don't read into pasta." Derek nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "But you like her." "Derek, you don't deny it." Mason stood up, gathered the wrapper from his sandwich, and deposited it in the trash with the measured deliberateness of a man who is not going to have this conversation. "Some of us have work to do," he said. Derek, behind him, said nothing, but he was smiling. Mason was reasonably sure of it. The call Mason hadn't expected came on a Thursday evening, 6 days after the certification board inquiry had been confirmed. He was helping Lily with a math worksheet, second grade addition and subtraction with 2 digits, which was fine, except Lily had very specific feelings about carrying numbers and felt it was being presented in a misleading way. When his phone buzzed with an unknown number, he almost didn't answer it. He answered it. "Is this Mason Carter?" "Yes." "Mr. Carter, my name is Philip Soar. I'm general counsel for Dryden Corp." A pause. "I apologize for calling in the evening. Do you have a few minutes?" Lily looked up from her worksheet. Mason held up one finger, 1 minute, and she looked back down with the expression of a child who is reserving judgment. "I have a few minutes," Mason said. He stood up and moved toward the kitchen. "I'll be direct," Soar said. "Our board has reviewed the preliminary inquiry materials and the documentation provided through Sterling Vantage's compliance process. We've also reviewed the archived insurance filings independently." Another pause. "The discrepancies are significant." "I'm aware," Mason said. "The conduct that occurred was not sanctioned by Dryden's current leadership. Nichols left the company 18 months after the incident, and the 2 VPs involved departed shortly after. The board at the time signed off on a document they were told was accurate." Soare's voice was professional and careful, the voice of someone navigating a liability situation with their eyes open. "That doesn't absolve the institutional record, but I want you to understand that we are not trying to protect what was done." Mason stood in his kitchen and listened. "We'd like to propose a formal record correction," Soar said. "A written acknowledgement filed with the relevant certification and industry bodies that the incident report of record was inaccurate as filed, and a corrected incident summary restoring your name to the countermeasure documentation and removing the performance deficiency notation from your professional record." He paused. "We'd like to do this quietly and without litigation, if that's acceptable to you." Mason didn't answer immediately. "What does quietly mean exactly?" he asked. "It means the corrected record goes to the industry body. Your professional standing is restored. No press release, no public statement from either side, unless you elect to make one independently. A brief pause. We'd also like to offer a financial settlement acknowledging the professional and economic impact of the period in question. I'm not interested in a settlement. A beat. Mr. Carter. The record correction, Mason said. That's what I want. That's what I've always wanted. The money doesn't fix anything. He kept his voice even. Get the correction filed properly. Make sure my name is on what I built. That's the outcome. A longer pause. We can do that. Then we have an agreement in principle. Your formal paperwork goes through my contact at Sterling Vantage. Of course. Swar cleared his throat slightly. Mr. Carter, for what it's worth, what you built was exceptional work. The people who minimized it knew that. That was precisely why it was minimized. Mason looked at the kitchen wall for a moment. I know, he said. Thank you for calling. He hung up and stood in the kitchen for a minute, his hand still resting on the counter. Then he heard Lily from the table. Dad, I figured out the carrying thing. He walked back to the table. She had her worksheet in front of her, and she'd worked through the problem she'd been fighting with, and the answer was written in her careful second-grade handwriting, and it was correct. Nice work, he said. It's not that hard, she said, with the casual authority of someone who had just decided something was conquered. You just have to know where it goes. He sat down across from her and looked at the worksheet and thought about that for a second. The idea that the hard part wasn't the math itself, but just knowing where things went, where things belonged. Yeah, he said, you do. He helped her finish the worksheet. Outside the window, the city moved through its evening. Somewhere across town, Ava Sterling was probably still at her desk, or in a meeting, or doing whatever the owner of a company did on a Thursday night when things were in motion and the world was shifting in small, irreversible ways. The worksheet took another 12 minutes. Lily declared the whole thing resolved and went to get ready for bed without being asked, which was an anomaly worth noting but not questioning. Mason put the worksheet in her backpack and sat at the table alone for a moment in the quiet kitchen, and felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, and not relief exactly, but a specific settled quality, like a joint popping back into place after years slightly wrong. Not fixed, not perfect, just correctly positioned, finally, in the way things were supposed to sit. He got up and washed the dinner dishes. He had work tomorrow. The building needed him. The formal record correction landed on a Monday morning, 43 days after Philip Suar's Thursday evening call. Nora Tillman sent Mason a PDF at 8:17 a.m. with a subject line that read, Filed. Please review. He was already in the building, on his way up to 9 for a routine check on the East Wing water pressure system, when his phone buzzed. He read the email in the elevator. He read it again on the 9th floor, standing in the mechanical corridor with the overhead fluorescents humming above him and the sound of the building around him doing what buildings did. Breathing, essentially, the slow systemic circulation of air and water and electricity that kept everything functional. The document was 4 pages. The first 3 were legal language, formal, specific, organized in the way legal language was organized when it was doing real work rather than performing it. The 4th page was the corrected incident summary. His name was on it. Primary engineer, countermeasure design, and implementation, Mason Carter. The vulnerability identification timeline. The 6 months of proactive monitoring. The 12 minutes from detection to containment. All of it, laid out accurately, time-stamped correctly, attributed correctly. Below that, a single line where the performance deficiency notation had been. Record reflects no professional deficiency. Previous notation rescinded and removed in full. He put his phone in his pocket. He stood in the mechanical corridor for about 30 seconds. Then he went to work on the water pressure system because the building didn't care about the state of his professional record and the work order wasn't going to complete itself. He got through 4 hours before Derek ambushed him in the break room again. Priya got flowers, Derek said without preamble, sitting down across from Mason with the air of a man delivering significant news. Okay, Mason said, from Ava, with a note. Derek leaned forward. Priya showed me the note. It said, things moved the right way today. Thought you'd want to know. He paused. That's a very specific kind of flower note. It sounds like Ava letting her marketing director know the outcome of a professional matter. The flowers were peonies. I don't know what that means. Priya says it means something. Mason looked at his coworker. Derek had the expression he wore when he was genuinely invested in a situation rather than just making conversation. Slightly more serious, slightly less performatively casual. It was a more honest version of his face. The record correction went through, Mason said. Derek went quiet. It's official, Mason said. My name's back on what I built. The other thing is gone. He picked up his coffee. That's what today is. Derek was quiet for another moment. That was unusual. Derek's default was words, consistently, more words than most situations required. The silence meant he understood the weight. That's a big deal, Derek said finally. Yeah. How are you doing with it? Mason considered the question honestly, because Derek was asking it honestly. Strange, he said. Good strange, mostly. But it doesn't feel like I expected it to feel, if I'd thought about expecting it. It's quieter. Quieter how? Like, I thought it would feel like winning something, but it just feels like something being corrected, like a wrong number that finally got fixed. He paused. Less fireworks than you'd think. That might be a healthy response. Derek, you've been watching too many therapy videos online. I watch exactly the right amount, Derek said without embarrassment. My therapist says I'm making good progress. Mason looked at him. You have a therapist. For 18 months. You should get one. I'm fine. That's what you always say. And usually it's true. Derek picked up his own cup. The record thing is good, Mason. I know you're being quiet about it. I know that's your thing, but it's good, and you should let it be good. A beat. Ava Sterling went to a lot of trouble. I know she did. She didn't have to. I know. Derek nodded slowly. He seemed to feel he had completed the important part of the conversation because he shifted gears to the ventilation work order on 15 that they both had to get to, and the moment closed over neatly, the way moments did when you both agreed without saying so that you'd said what needed saying. Eat, Ava called him that evening. He was at the kitchen table with Lily, who was in the middle of a sustained argument, conducted largely with herself, with occasional appeals to Mason as a silent jury, about whether the protagonist of her current book had made the correct decision in Chapter 7. The protagonist, a 12-year-old named Wren, had chosen to tell the truth about something difficult, which Lily felt was correct but also felt had been handled incorrectly, a distinction she was working through. She should have told the truth, but differently, Lily said. Differently how? More carefully. What does carefully look like? Like, not in front of everyone. It should have been private. Mason's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it. Ava Sterling. Hang on, he said to Lily. He answered. Hey. Hey. Her voice was different from the working version, less clipped, less organized, not unprofessional, just off-duty somehow. I wanted to call instead of just emailing. Is this a bad time? We're in a book debate. It can pause. He glanced at Lily, who was looking at him with the frank curiosity of a child who felt conversations about her book should not pause for phone calls. 1 minute, he told her, and stood up. He moved to the kitchen doorway. I saw the document, he said. I know, Nora confirmed delivery. A pause. I wanted to hear your voice, actually, not just the email confirmation. He leaned against the doorframe. That's an honest thing to say. I practice. How are you feeling about it? Honestly? A beat. Satisfied, which is different from happy. It's more functional than that. Like I fixed something that needed fixing and now the shape of it is right. She paused. Does that make sense? More than you know. She was quiet for a second. How about you? Quieter than I expected, he said, which was the same thing he told Derek, because it was still the most accurate way he had to describe it. Like the volume got turned down on something that had been running in the background for a long time. That sounds like peace. Maybe. A small version of it. Small versions are underrated. He could hear her moving. The sound of a chair, papers, the ambient sounds of a room. I have something to tell you, and I want to tell you now before it becomes awkward not to have told you. He straightened slightly. Okay. I've been talking to our head of security infrastructure. We have a position opening in the new year. Senior security architect, overseeing the integration layer across all 4 offices. She paused. It's a significant role. It pays accordingly. And it is not something I created for you. The position has been in the planning documents for 8 months. I'd show you the dated files if you needed me to. Another pause. But you'd be exceptional at it, and your credentials, once the record correction is properly processed across the certification registry, will fully support your candidacy. I want you to know it exists. He was quiet. That's the information, she said. What you do with it is entirely your decision. I'm not asking you to take it. I'm not creating pressure. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the option exists and because she stopped. He could hear her choosing. Because the version of your life where you spend the next 20 years as a maintenance technician is not a bad life. You're good at it and you've built something real. But it was also not the only version available to you, and I didn't want you to not know that. The refrigerator hummed. From the table, Lily said, Dad, Ren just did another thing, which meant she was still reading and losing patience with the pause. I hear you, Mason said. You don't have to say anything tonight. I'm not saying anything tonight, he paused, but Ava, thank you for the way you said it. What do you mean? The way you made it clear it's a real position, not a favor. He looked at the kitchen wall, the calendar on it with Lily's school events written in his handwriting. That matters. I know it matters, she said quietly. That's why I said it that way. They stayed on the phone for another few minutes without talking about anything in particular. She mentioned a problem she was having with a catering vendor for a company event, which she complained about with a dry precision that made him laugh once. Actually laugh, the way you do when something is genuinely funny rather than politely amusing. She laughed a little too, when he told her about Lily's theory that the book's protagonist had done the right thing, but not the right way. He could hear her considering it seriously. She's not wrong, Ava said. That's what I thought. Smart kid. She is. Exhaustingly so, sometimes. You're going to have your hands full in 10 years. I'm already aware. They hung up, and Mason stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment before going back to the table, where Lily had progressed 3 pages further and now had additional concerns about Chapter 8. He sat down. He listened to the Chapter 8 concerns. He made reasonable replies. But part of his mind was somewhere else, turning over what Ava had said. The position, the way she'd described it, the care she'd taken to make it an honest offer rather than a soft rescue. He'd spent 3 years being careful not to need anything from anyone, which was a reasonable response to a period when everything had come apart at once, but which had also calcified into something he hadn't fully examined. The reflexive independence, the settled smallness of a life built around not reaching for things that might not be there. The offer was real. The option was real. He didn't have to decide anything that night. He sat with his daughter and her book and his ordinary apartment and let the evening be what it was. The following Saturday, Ava came to dinner. This had not been planned with any particular ceremony. It had happened in increments over the course of the week, a text conversation that had moved from professional logistics to something more ordinary, a mention that Lily had apparently decided the book protagonist made all the wrong choices in Chapter 9 and was very bothered by it, and Ava asking, with the slight awkwardness of someone proposing something they're not sure will land well, whether she could actually meet this child in person. Mason had said yes, which had surprised him a little. He'd thought about it before replying, not for long, but with the genuine consideration he tried to bring to things that actually mattered. He'd asked himself whether it was too early, whether it sent the wrong signal, whether Lily would read too much into it, or not enough. He didn't have perfect answers to any of those questions, which he decided meant he should just be honest with Lily about what dinner was. Someone he knew from work was coming over, her name was Ava, she was coming because she wanted to, and that was the whole story. Lily had said, "Is she the date lady?" "Derek is not as discreet as he thinks he is," Mason said. "Mrs. Huang told me." "Of course she did. Is she?" "She's someone I've been spending time with." Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to new information. Does she like pasta? I think so. We should make the good kind. The good kind takes an hour. I'll help. So they made the good kind. The scratch version with the sauce Lily usually rejected in its jarred form but accepted with the condescension of a food critic when it was made from actual ingredients. She stood on her step stool at the counter and stirred things when directed and added too much salt once, which Mason caught before it became catastrophic. And she was extremely serious about the whole operation in the way she was serious about things she'd decided mattered. Ava arrived at 6:30 with a bottle of sparkling cider and a small cactus in a pot that she handed to Lily with the simple explanation that it was hard to kill and therefore a reasonable first plant. Lily took the cactus and looked at it with the expression she reserved for things she wasn't sure about yet. "What's its name?" she asked. "It doesn't have one," Ava said. "I thought you should name it." "It looks like a Gerald." A pause. "Then Gerald it is." Something in Mason's chest shifted, just slightly. The dinner was not a smooth operation. The pasta was slightly overcooked because the conversation while waiting for the water to boil had been more interesting than the clock, and Lily spilled her cider getting to the table and spent 2 minutes being genuinely upset about it before deciding it was fine. And the topic of conversation jumped around in the way it did when a 7-year-old was one of the participants. From the book to migratory birds to a kid in Lily's class named Felix, who had strong opinions about jump rope rules, to the question of whether cactuses felt things. "Plants respond to stimuli," Ava said, which was the honest answer. Lily thought about this. "So Gerald might know when I water him." "In a very rudimentary sense, yes." "I'll be consistent," Lily said, with the gravity of someone making a commitment. Ava glanced at Mason across the table. The glance lasted about 2 seconds, and it was not a loaded look or a meaningful look in any performed sense. It was just the specific look of a person caught genuinely enjoying a moment. He looked back with the same quality of expression, and neither of them said anything about it, and the dinner continued. After Lily was in bed, which required negotiation, specifically around whether Gerald should sleep in her room, which was resolved in the affirmative, Mason and Ava sat at the kitchen table with the remains of the pasta and the bottle of cider and the particular quiet of an apartment after a child has gone to sleep. "She's exactly what you described," Ava said. "Which part?" "All of it. Opinions about everything. 40 years old inside a 7-year-old. She turned her cider glass slowly. "She has your directness." "I keep saying she has Rachel's." "Maybe she has both." Ava paused. "Does it bother you, talking about Rachel? I don't want to—" "It doesn't bother me," Mason said. It was true. 3 years had changed the quality of it. Not diminished it, but changed the temperature. Rachel was the person she was, fully and completely, and she had shaped Lily in ways Mason could see clearly, in ways he probably couldn't, and that was a fact he'd made his peace with in the way you make peace with things that are simply true. It bothered me for a long time. Now it mostly just feels accurate. "She was a good person," Ava said quietly. "I didn't know her well, but from what I knew, she was. She was also stubborn and impatient, and she hated losing arguments." He paused. "She would have liked you." Ava looked at him. "That's an honest thing to say," she said, which was what he'd said to her on the phone weeks ago, and she was using it back at him, not unkindly. "I practice," he said. She smiled, not the almost smile she'd given him at the restaurant on the first night, but the real version, which was different. It changed her face in a way the controlled version didn't, and it made her look like the person she was when nobody was grading her on it. He got up to clear the plates. She stood and helped, which he'd expected her not to do. He'd half anticipated the dynamic of a guest staying seated while the host worked, but she moved to the kitchen with the ease of someone who was comfortable taking up space in someone else's home. Stacking plates, finding the right cabinet for the glasses by guessing correctly on the second try. "The position," he said while he was at the sink. I've been thinking about it." "I assumed you had." She leaned against the counter, not crowding him, not watching him too carefully, just present. "I don't want the job because of what happened between us," he said. "Whatever that is. I need to want it because it's the right professional move. Because I'm qualified and because the work is something I want to do. He paused. Those things are both true, but I needed to separate them first. That's a reasonable thing to need. I also needed to figure out whether I could work for you. He glanced at her. Not just alongside the same building, actually work for you. And? I think I can, but it would need to be clear, in both directions, that it's professional in the office. Fully professional. I don't mix those. I don't either, she said. I'd want the same thing. Then I'd like to apply for the position. Officially, through the HR process. Yes. He turned off the faucet. Through the HR process, like a normal person who's not sleeping with his boss. You're not sleeping with your boss? I know. I want to keep it that way. At work. A pause. The phrasing had a shape to it, and they both noticed the shape, and neither of them made a production of it. Send your updated CV to the general applications inbox, Ava said, with the composure of someone managing a situation with one corner of her mouth. The hiring manager is Sandra Reyes, no relation to David. And she's thorough, so be prepared for a technical assessment. I can handle a technical assessment. I know you can. I've read your old work. She said it simply. I looked up everything I could find that was publicly attributed to you, back when you were at Dryden, before any of this happened. She paused. You were very good. He looked at her. Past tense. You're very good, she corrected. Present tense. The certification lapse doesn't change the underlying competence. He dried his hands on the dish towel. The kitchen was clean, which took less time with two people than with one, which was itself a small and unremarkable observation that he filed somewhere without meaning to. I should go, Ava said. It's late. It's 9:40. By the standards of someone who has a 7-year-old, that's late. He walked her to the door. She picked up her coat from the hook. She'd found the hook without being shown, he noticed, and put it on with the economical movements of someone who'd been dressing themselves in a hurry for years. At the door, she stopped and looked at him. Mason, she said. For the record, I came to dinner tonight because I wanted to. Not because of the job, not because of the record correction, not because of any of the professional pieces. She met his eyes. I wanted to see how you lived. I wanted to meet Lily, that's all. I know, he said. Do you? He thought about the question. He thought about the reflex he'd developed over 3 years, the one that treated any incoming warmth as something to be measured and assessed before being accepted, held at arm's length until it could be verified. The self-protective distance that had kept him functional, but had also, he was beginning to see, kept him further from things than was strictly necessary. I'm working on knowing it, he said honestly. She nodded once, as if that was the right answer rather than the easy one. She left. He stood at the closed door for a moment, then went to check on Lily, who was asleep with Gerald the cactus on her nightstand, and one arm hanging off the edge of the bed in the specific graceless sprawl of a deeply sleeping child. He repositioned her arm. She didn't wake up. He stood in the doorway of her room in the dark for a moment, doing the thing he always did, just listening. The steady, small sound of her breathing, the specific alive presence of her in the room. He thought about the job application he'd submit tomorrow. He thought about the way Ava had found the coat hook without being shown. He thought about a lot of things, briefly, in the way you think about things at the end of an evening that has shifted something you can't quite articulate. Then he turned off the hallway light and went to bed. He slept better than he had in a while. Not perfectly. He never slept perfectly. But the particular quality of restlessness that had moved through his nights for years was quieter than usual, as if some source of low-level noise had been switched off, and the room was just a room, and the night was just a night, and tomorrow was a day he was actually looking forward to getting to. It wasn't happiness, exactly. Or maybe it was, in the specific, unspectacular form that happiness took when you'd been without it long enough to stop expecting the fireworks version. It was enough. For now, more than enough. The CV went in on a Monday morning through the general applications inbox, addressed to Sandra Reyes, hiring manager, Sterling Vantage Technologies. Mason sent it from his personal email at 7:04 a.m. before Lily was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee he hadn't tasted yet, and the particular stillness of an apartment in the hour before the day started. He read through the document one more time, updated certifications, corrected professional history. The Dryden incident now listed accurately under his employment record as cybersecurity engineer, lead countermeasure architect, Hartwell Breach Prevention 2021, and then he sent it before he could find a reason to wait another day. He had been finding reasons to wait for 4 years. He was done with that. Sandra Reyes' automated acknowledgement arrived at 7:09. Her actual email arrived at 9:45, confirming receipt and scheduling a technical assessment for the following Thursday. Professional, thorough, no indication that she knew anything about Mason's existing relationship with the building or its owner, which meant Ava had kept the wall clean, exactly as she'd said she would. He'd expected that. He was still glad to see it confirmed. The technical assessment was 3 hours long and covered network architecture, vulnerability management frameworks, incident response protocols, and a simulated breach scenario that Sandra Reyes' team had clearly designed to filter out people who could talk about security work but couldn't actually do it. Mason moved through it with the steady competence of someone who had never stopped thinking like an engineer, even when his hands had been doing different work. He caught 2 things in the simulated scenario that he suspected were deliberate traps: edge cases designed to see whether a candidate would overcorrect under pressure. He noted them, explained his reasoning, and moved on. Afterward, Sandra Reyes shook his hand and said, "We'll be in touch within a week." Her expression was professionally neutral, but she'd stopped taking notes about 40 minutes in and had started just listening, which Mason had worked with enough people to recognize as a good sign. He went back to his maintenance shift and fixed a broken sump pump on basement level 2 and did not tell anyone where he'd been all morning. Ava did not contact him during the week. This was deliberate on both their parts, though they hadn't explicitly said so. He'd understood from their last conversation, from the specific care she'd taken to separate the professional pieces from the personal ones, that she would not put her thumb on the hiring process and that she was trusting him to understand the same. So he didn't text her. She didn't call. The week passed in its ordinary way. On Tuesday, Lily lost a tooth, the second bottom front one, which had been loose for a week, and which she finally extracted herself during lunch at school by, according to her account, simply deciding it was time. She came home with it wrapped in a piece of paper towel and a gap in her smile that made her look simultaneously younger and older than 7, which was a disorienting combination. "Does it hurt?" Mason asked. "A little, but I wanted it out." She showed him the tooth, which she'd apparently examined in some detail. "It's smaller than I thought. They always are." "What do you do with them?" "After." He thought about the small ceramic box in his dresser drawer where he kept the first one, and the one before that, each wrapped in the same kind of paper towel from the school nurse. "You keep them," he said. "Why?" He didn't have a clean answer for that. He thought about it honestly. "Because they're proof that time happened," he said. "That things changed, and you kept going." Lily considered this. "That's kind of sad." "It's kind of both," he said. She looked at her tooth for another moment. Then she wrapped it back up in the paper towel and took it to her room to add it to the collection. And Mason stood in the kitchen thinking about the particular weight of small things kept. The offer letter arrived on Friday. It came from Sandra Reyes, not from Ava, formal, detailed, with a start date of January 15th, a salary that made Mason look at the number twice and then a third time, and a benefits package that included things he had not had access to in 4 years. Senior security architect, Sterling Vantage Technologies, all 4 offices. Reporting to the head of infrastructure, with a dotted line to executive leadership. He read it twice. He set it down. He picked it up and read the salary line again, because he was human. He called his sister in Portland, who was the person he called when things happened that needed to be said out loud to someone who would understand the full distance traveled. Her name was Dana. She was 36. She had known about Dryden from the beginning and had watched Mason rebuild himself in the years since with the careful helplessness of a sibling who understood that some things you can only witness, not fix. She answered on the second ring with, "What happened? Why do you assume something happened?" "Because you only call on Fridays when something happened. You call on Sundays when everything is normal." He told her about the offer. He told her the number. There was a long silence from Portland. "Mason," Dana said. "I know. I know. Are you going to take it? Yes? Good. Her voice had the quality it got when she was holding something together. I'm proud of you. I've been proud of you for a long time, but I'm especially proud of you right now. I didn't do much, he said. Someone else went looking for the problem. You kept the documentation for 4 years, Dana said. You kept it when there was no reason to think anyone would ever ask for it. You kept the USB drive in a box in your closet because part of you knew it was worth keeping, even when everything else was telling you to let it go. A pause. That's not someone else's work. That's yours. He sat with that for a moment. Tell Lily I said congratulations, Dana said. For obvious reasons, she won't fully understand for a few more years. She'll understand more than you think. She's your kid. She probably will. He signed the offer letter that evening, scanned it, and sent it back to Sandra Reyes at 6:58 p.m. Then he texted Ava. I said yes. Her reply came in under 2 minutes. I know, Sandra told me. For the record, she said you were the strongest technical candidate by a significant margin. He looked at the screen. For the record, she'd written. The same phrase he'd used at Dryden 4 years ago, in the incident report that had been taken from him and rewritten. She'd used it back at him now, in a context that meant the opposite. He didn't know if she'd done it deliberately. He thought she probably had. He typed, "Thank you for all of it." 3 dots appeared, then, "You did the work. I just made some calls." He set his phone down and thought about that framing, which was both true and not entirely true, and which was the version she'd chosen to give him because she understood that a man who had spent 4 years carefully not needing anything from anyone needed to hear that his own effort had been sufficient, that he hadn't been rescued, that the story ended with him standing on his own ground. She understood that about him. He didn't know when that had happened, but it had. December moved through its ordinary business. Lily's school had a winter concert, which Mason attended and recorded on his phone, and during which Lily stood in the second row and sang with the focused intensity she brought to most things, and during which Mason thought about how much could change in a year without announcing itself. 12 months ago, he had been a maintenance technician in a building he was learning to call ordinary. Tonight, he was a maintenance technician in the same building who had somehow, in the space between then and now, gotten his name back and said yes to a different future. He sent the concert video to Dana. He almost sent it to Ava, then did, and she replied with a single line. She's going to be trouble in the best possible way. They had dinner again the week before Christmas, not at the apartment this time, but at a restaurant on the west side of Crestfield that was warm and unpretentious and busy enough that the ambient noise gave their table a useful privacy. Ava had suggested it, he had agreed, and neither of them had performed any particular uncertainty about what it was. 2 people who were spending time together deliberately and without pretending otherwise. She told him about her mother, the woman who had worked in a building 2 blocks from Hartwell when Ava was a child, the woman who had raised Ava and her younger brother alone after their father left when Ava was 11, the woman who had looked at her daughter's first business plan at 23 and said, without sentiment, "This is either going to work or it isn't, but you should try." Her mother had died 4 years ago, 3 months before Mason's own life had unraveled, and Ava had been building the company in the years since with the particular energy of someone who was partly doing it for themselves and partly doing it for a witness who was no longer present to see it. "She would have had opinions about you," Ava said. "Good or bad?" "Both, at first. She was like that with everyone. She'd have watched you with Lily and decided you were worth the trouble." "That's a specific bar." "It was her bar. She applied it to everyone." Ava turned her glass. "She would have liked that you kept those documents for 4 years. She had a thing about people who kept receipts. She said it was the difference between people who trusted the world to be fair and people who understood it wasn't, but showed up anyway." Mason was quiet for a moment. He thought about the box in the hall closet, the careful handwriting on the outside, the USB drive he'd mailed in an envelope on a Thursday morning when he'd had no particular reason to believe anything would come of it. "I didn't keep them because I was strategic," he said. "I kept them because throwing them away felt like agreeing with the version of events that destroyed me." "That might be the same thing," Ava said. "Maybe." You didn't let them write you out of your own story, she said. Even when you stepped back from fighting, you held the evidence that you were there, that you did the work, that it happened the way it happened. She looked at him. That matters. He met her eyes across the table. You do this thing, he said. What thing? You say the thing I've been trying to find a way to say to myself, and you just say it out loud, like it's obvious. It is obvious. Not from the inside. She considered this. No, she said. Probably not from the inside. She paused. That's what other people are for. It was a quiet statement, and it landed quietly, and Mason felt it in the specific place where he kept the things he'd been trying not to need. The desire to be known, the exhausting effort of being the only person who fully understood his own situation, the loneliness that was not dramatic or acute but just structural, woven into the framework of a life built for one adult and one child and not much else. That was what other people are for. He'd known that once. He'd let himself forget it, out of necessity, and then out of habit, and then just out of the accumulated weight of 3 years of being the one who kept things running. Yeah, he said. I know. Christmas was small, as it had been for 3 years, just Mason and Lily and Mrs. Huang, who had no family in Crestfield and accepted their standing holiday invitation with the dignified graciousness of someone pretending to be doing them a favor when it was largely the reverse. Lily got a telescope and a new book about ocean ecosystems, and a game that involved building things from cards, which she immediately applied to Gerald the cactus by arranging 3 cards around his pot in what she described as his house. Gerald had survived 6 weeks. This was, apparently, a milestone. On New Year's Eve, Ava came over. It was not a party. It was the 4 of them, Mason, Lily, Mrs. Huang, and Ava, in the apartment with food Mason had cooked and a sparkling cider for Lily and a bottle of actual wine for the adults and a board game Mrs. Huang had brought that was approximately 40 years old and had different rules in different parts of the box, which caused an extended interpretive dispute that Lily adjudicated with the confidence of a 7-year-old who had recently been told she was good at this. Lily fell asleep at 10:15 in the armchair in the middle of Mrs. Huang telling a story about a cat she'd had in 1987. Mrs. Huang looked at the child sleeping in the chair with the expression she always had when she looked at Lily. Not sentimental exactly, but the particular steady warmth of a person who understood what they were looking at. She's going to be someone, Mrs. Huang said quietly. She already is, Mason said. Mrs. Huang left at 11 with the board game in her coat, and the apartment was quiet, and Lily was still asleep in the chair, and Mason and Ava sat on the couch with the remains of the wine and the particular companionable quiet of 2 people who had passed the point of needing to fill the silence. Outside, the city was working up toward midnight. The distant sound of it came through the window, not loud, just present. How are you feeling about January? Ava asked. Nervous, he said. It was the honest answer. Good nervous or bad nervous? Good. Mostly. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. I've been doing maintenance for 3 years. I know how to do it. I know what a good day looks like, what a hard day looks like. I know where everything is. He paused. Going back to the other thing, I know I'm capable of it, but I don't know what it looks like yet, what my days will look like, who I'll be in that version. You'll be the same person, Ava said. People keep saying that. Because it's true. It doesn't feel entirely true from the inside. He glanced at her. The job changed when the title changed last time. I became someone different. Not all of it was good. She turned to look at him. What was the bad version? He thought about it. It wasn't a question people usually asked. Usually the assumption was that professional success was uncomplicated, that having a title and a salary and a future meant you were doing the right thing in the right direction. I was impatient, he said, with people who worked slower than I did, with processes that seemed inefficient. I was probably not fun to work with toward the end before Dryden happened. He paused. I knew I was good, and I let that become an attitude. And now? Now I've spent 3 years being the person who shows up and fixes what's broken and doesn't need credit for it. He was quiet for a second. I don't want to lose that. Whatever I became in those years, the patience, the ability to just do the work without it being about me, I don't want the new job to take that back. Ava was quiet for a moment. I don't think it will. You don't know that. No, she said. But I know what broke your career and what didn't break you, and I think those are different things. The success didn't break you. The injustice didn't break you ultimately. She paused. What shaped you was choosing your family over your ambition, repeatedly, without complaint, for years. That's not something a job title can undo. He looked at her. You're doing that thing again, he said. Saying the obvious thing? Yes. I'll try to be less useful. He laughed, properly, the way he had on the phone, the genuine kind. She laughed too, which still did the same thing to her face, the real version displacing the composed version, and the apartment was warm and Lily was asleep in the armchair and the city outside was building toward midnight. Ava, he said. I want to say something, and I want to say it before the year changes because that feels like the right time. He turned to look at her properly. I'm not good at this. I should say that first. I was good at it once when I was younger and things were different, but I've spent 4 years being the person who does everything alone, and I've gotten very efficient at it, and some of that efficiency is going to be annoying to be around. I'm already aware. I'm slow. I check things. I don't make declarations easily. He held her gaze. But I want you to know that what's happened since September, all of it, the dinner, the records, the Saturday morning with Reyes, Lily naming a cactus Gerald, tonight, none of it is something I'm taking lightly. None of it has felt like something I'm doing because it's the path of least resistance, or because I'm lonely, or because you did something nice for me and I feel obligated. He paused. It's felt like something true. And I don't say that to people. I haven't said it to anyone in a long time. Ava looked at him with the expression she had when she was taking something in fully, rather than processing it quickly. She didn't say anything for a moment. I know, she said finally. Her voice was quieter than usual. I knew that about you before you said it. But I'm glad you said it. Why? Because you were right. It needed to be before midnight. Outside, the sound of the city shifted. Something changed in the collective noise of it, the way it always did in the last minute of the year, people gathering themselves toward the turn. They could hear it through the window, that particular distributed anticipation. He reached over and took her hand, not with ceremony, not with any performance of the moment, just his hand finding hers on the couch between them, and her fingers adjusting around his without a beat of hesitation, with the ease of something that had been available for a while and had finally been accepted. The city made its noise. The year changed. Lily, in the armchair, slept through all of it. January 15th arrived the way significant days usually did. Unremarkably, with the same alarm and the same kitchen and the same routine of cereal and backpack and Lily having strong opinions about her socks, which had not changed since September and showed no sign of changing ever. He dropped her at school at 7:55. You look different, she said, getting out of the car. How so? She considered him with the forensic attention she brought to certain questions. Your jacket is different. It's new. Why? First day of a new job. She looked at the jacket, which was a dark charcoal blazer he had bought 2 weeks ago. Not expensive, but better than the 3-year-old one that had started this whole sequence of events, which he'd retired with no ceremony. It's a good jacket, Lily said, in the tone of a final verdict. Thank you. Good luck. She said it with the brisk sincerity of a child who meant it completely and was already half turned toward the school entrance. You'll be fine. He watched her go inside. He sat in the car for a moment. You'll be fine. He had said those words to her, probably hundreds of times, in the specific calibrated way of a parent trying to give a child the feeling of safety. Apparently she had absorbed them and was now using them back on him, with the same matter-of-fact confidence, as if it were simply true and the discussion was over. He drove to work. The day was not a movie. It was paperwork mostly, and introductions to people he would work with, and a security architecture briefing from the outgoing contractor whose position he was stepping into, who was thorough and professional and had left documentation that was, Mason noted with relief, genuinely organized. There was a team of 5 reporting to a different manager who would work with Mason on the integration layer. 2 of them were clearly competent and immediately communicative. One was quiet in the watchful way of someone who was figuring out whether to trust the new person, and 2 were uncertain enough about the transition that Mason mentally put them in the column of situations that would require patience. That was fine. He had patience. At noon, he went to the building next door to the sandwich shop with the 8 tables and ordered at the counter and found a seat by the window and sat with his food and his phone and the ordinary midday sounds of a city block at lunchtime and thought about how the same geography could mean entirely different things at different points in your life. He had sat in this shop 4 months ago and told Ava Sterling about the worst thing that had ever happened to him. He was sitting here now on the first day of the job that the worst thing had eventually led him toward. He thought about what it meant that the path had run this way, that losing everything had been the precondition for ending up here, in this specific configuration, that if Nichols hadn't revised the incident report, Mason would have stayed at Dryden. He would have made principal engineer probably. He and Rachel would have had their planned life, and it would have been good, and Lily would have grown up in a different apartment in a different neighborhood, and Mason would never have learned to be patient in the particular way that only came from being the person who showed up without being thanked. He would never have been sitting in the break room on the 14th floor when Ava's climate control system needed fixing. He would never have had that conversation. He didn't know what to make of the mathematics of it, the idea that pain could be the arithmetic that produced something you wouldn't trade. He didn't think it was a clean equation. He didn't think losing Rachel had been worth anything, didn't think the 3 years of quiet struggle had been worth anything as a price paid for what came after. Life wasn't a transaction. The bad things didn't make the good things cost less. But he thought about something his father had said to him once, when Mason was about 17 and had been passed over for something he'd wanted, some academic program, some opportunity he'd thought he deserved, and had come home furious about the injustice of it. His father had listened and then said simply, "You'll build around it." Not that it wasn't unfair, not that it didn't hurt. Just, you'll build around it. The way a tree grows around a nail that's been driven into it, incorporating the damage into the structure without being stopped by it. He had built around it. He finished his sandwich. He went back to work. The months that followed were not a clean progression. They were real months, which meant they had problems in them. In February, Mason managed a conflict badly. A disagreement with the infrastructure head about implementation timelines where Mason was right about the technical risk, but wrong about the way he communicated it, coming in too hard in a meeting without reading the room first, reverting briefly to the impatient version of himself he'd warned Ava about. The infrastructure head, a methodical man named Tom Garrett, did not appreciate being contradicted in front of his own team. It took 2 private conversations and a recalibrated approach to repair the working relationship, and the repair was imperfect for weeks before it settled. Mason told Ava about it, which was itself a new thing, having someone to tell about the parts of the day that hadn't gone well without performing either confidence or defeat. "I pushed too fast," he said. "I saw the problem and I went straight at it without thinking about the room." "What did you do about it?" "Talked to Tom directly. Acknowledged that I'd handled it wrong. Presented the technical case separately, without the audience." "Did he respond?" "Eventually. He's a reasonable person. He just needed the correction to come without witnesses." He paused. "I should have known that. I used to know how to read rooms." "You're relearning a context," Ava said. "It's not the same thing as not knowing." It felt the same. "The feelings aren't always the accurate information." She said it without dismissing the feeling, which he noted. "The action you took was correct. The timing was off. That's a process problem, not a character problem." He thought about that for a moment. "You are very good at this." "At what?" "Separating the thing that went wrong from the person who did the wrong thing." "I run a company," she said. "If I couldn't do that, I'd have lost everyone worth keeping a long time ago." In March, Lily had a difficult week. A falling out with Sophie that was apparently serious enough to require 2 days of processing, during which Lily was quieter than usual and ate her dinner without providing the customary running commentary on the day. Mason navigated it the way he navigated most things with Lily. He didn't push, he stayed available. He made sure the routines were solid, and he waited for her to bring it to him when she was ready. She came to him on a Wednesday evening in the kitchen while he was washing dishes and stood beside him and said, "Sophie said, I think I'm better than everyone." He turned off the water. "Do you?" he asked. Lily thought about it seriously, which was the right response. "Sometimes I think I'm right about things." Being right about things isn't the same as being better than people. "I know, but I don't always—" She stopped. "Sometimes I say it like it's obvious, and people don't like that." "No," he said, "they don't." She leaned against the counter. "Did you ever do that?" He looked at his daughter and thought about the version of himself he'd described to Ava over dinner in December. Impatient, efficient, letting his competence become an attitude. "Yes," he said, "I did, and I lost things because of it." "What did you do?" "I learned to slow down," he said, "to explain things instead of just knowing them, to let other people see what I was seeing instead of assuming they already should." He paused. "It took a while. I'm still not perfect at it." Lily was quiet for a moment. "I should probably tell Sophie that I know I did it." "Probably. Even if I was right about the thing I said." "Especially then," Mason said. She turned that over. "That's annoying." "Yes," he said. "It is." She went to bed having apparently made peace with the annoyance, and the following week she reported that Sophie was fine and they had resumed their complicated alliance, which had also weathered a jump rope dispute, a borrowed eraser incident, and at least 2 other events Mason hadn't fully tracked. He told Ava about the Sophie situation over the phone that same night, not because it required her input, but because it was the kind of thing you told someone when they had become the person you told things to. "She came to you on her own," Ava said. "She usually does." "That's not small." "I know." He paused. "She's going to be okay. She's got the pieces. She just needs time to learn how they fit." "Like her father," Ava said. He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "Like her father." Spring came to Crestfield in the specific way it came every year. Tentatively, with cold mornings and warm afternoons, the city shaking itself loose from winter without fully committing. The trees on Clement Street got their leaves back. Lily declared that Gerald had produced a new spine, which she monitored with the dedication of a scientist. The Saturday in April when everything shifted was not special by any external measure. Ava had come for dinner again. She came most Saturday evenings now, without it needing to be scheduled with any particular formality, the way things that have become real tend to stop requiring formal arrangements. She and Lily had developed their own shorthand over the months. The specific dynamic of a child who respected someone's directness and an adult who had taken the child seriously from the first night and had never stopped. Lily updated Ava on things without being prompted. On Gerald, on Sophie, on the ocean ecosystems book she'd finished, and the one about bird migration she'd started, on the migratory patterns of monarch butterflies that she felt were underappreciated. Ava, for her part, had learned not to soften her responses for the sake of age appropriateness, which Lily had recognized and appreciated from about the 3rd dinner onward. They were clearing up after dinner. Lily had been put in charge of returning things to the refrigerator, a responsibility she treated with excessive seriousness. When she stopped in the middle of the kitchen and said without particular prelude, "Are you going to become our family?" She was looking at Ava. The kitchen went very still. Ava looked at Lily, then looked at Mason, then looked back at Lily with the expression she had when she was deciding something carefully. "What do you mean by family?" she asked. Not deflecting, actually asking. Lily thought about it with the honesty the question deserved. "Like, you'd be here, not just on Saturdays." She paused. "Like you'd be someone we had." Mason set down the dish he was holding. The kitchen was quiet, and the evening was quiet, and Lily stood with a container of leftover pasta in her hands and waited for an answer with the patience of someone who had asked a real question and expected a real response. Ava looked at Mason. He looked back. And the thing that passed between them in that moment was not complicated, which was the thing about true things. They had a specific quality of simplicity when everything else had been stripped away. All the careful distance, the pacing, the reasonable adult management of expectations and timing and not wanting to push. All of it reduced to a kitchen on a Saturday evening, and a 7-year-old asking a direct question, and two people who already knew the answer standing on either side of it. "I'd like that," Ava said. She said it to Lily, but she was still looking at Mason when she said it. Lily processed this. "Okay," she said, with the calm finality of someone checking an item off a list. She put the pasta in the refrigerator, straightened up, and announced that she was going to check on Gerald before bed. She disappeared down the hall. Mason and Ava stood in the kitchen. "She's going to be trouble in the best possible way," Mason said. "I said that first." "You were right." Ava crossed the kitchen toward him, and he met her halfway, which was the part that mattered. Neither of them standing still and waiting, both of them moving, closing the distance that remained from a year of careful approach. She was close enough that he could see the small lines at the corners of her eyes when she looked up at him, the human specificity of a face he'd learned by the accumulation of ordinary evenings. He kissed her, not for the first time. They'd found their way there gradually, in the months since New Year's, with the honest awkwardness of two people who'd both been without this for a while and were relearning it. But this felt different in the specific way that things feel different when the context around them has shifted. Lily's question had changed the shape of the room. The answer had changed the shape of what they were. They stood in the kitchen for a moment afterward. "I should go check on Lily," he said. "Go check on Lily." He went down the hall. Lily was at her desk, examining Gerald with the magnifying glass she'd gotten for her birthday, her back to him. "He's doing great," she said, without turning. "Good. Dad?" "Yeah." She turned around. She looked at him with the direct assessment he'd been on the receiving end of since she was old enough to look at anything with intention. "You're happier," she said. It wasn't a question. He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, with a gap in her smile, and strong opinions about socks and a cactus named Gerald, and a capacity for seeing things clearly that was going to take her somewhere. Eventually, somewhere he wouldn't always be able to follow. He thought about the box in the hall closet, emptied now, folded flat. He thought about the drive in the sealed envelope on a Thursday morning, about the restaurant on the corner of Meridian and Fifth, the dark blazer, the moment he'd looked up and seen someone he hadn't prepared for. About Rachel, who had looked at him with the same directness this child had inherited and had always told him the truth even when it wasn't comfortable. About 3 years of being exactly enough for exactly the life he had. About what it meant to build around something, to grow through the shape of a loss without being stopped by it. "Yeah," he said. "I am." Lily turned back to Gerald. "Good," she said. "You should be." He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he went back to the kitchen, where Ava was finishing the dishes because she had stopped pretending she was a guest somewhere between December and January, and he picked up a dish towel, and the two of them finished cleaning up in the warm light of the apartment with the city outside doing what cities did, and the spring evening coming down over Crestfield with its particular quality of beginning. No single thing had been fixed perfectly. The months ahead would have their problems, Tom Garrett and the infrastructure team, Sophie and the jump rope disputes, the slow, careful work of building trust between two adults who had both survived things that had changed them, the 10,000 ordinary complications of a life assembled from parts that didn't originally belong together. But it was a real life, unmistakably, imperfectly, completely real. And there was something Mason had come to understand about real things, about the ones that lasted. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't arrive with the clarity of a single moment or the tidiness of a resolved equation. They were built the way he had always built things, carefully, with attention to the parts that other people overlooked, through the accumulated work of days that didn't feel significant until you were standing far enough back to see what they'd made. He had lost everything once, at 28, in a season of his life when he had thought losing everything was a thing that happened to other people. He had built around it. He had made something from the material he had left. A child who asked honest questions, a set of calloused hands that knew their work, a life small enough to hold clearly and large enough to matter. And somehow, on the other side of all of it, there was this, a kitchen and a woman who had found the coat hook without being shown, and a 7-year-old down the hall making scientific observations about a cactus named Gerald. That was the whole story. It was more than enough.